Imagine waking up to a nightmare. Okay, considering how 2025's been going, it's not that hard to imagine, but work with me on this, okay? You are a child, barely the size of a teapot in a world not made for you. You are surrounded by danger, large, unsafe environments to navigate, and giant, grotesque adults to avoid. Everything about this nightmare tells you over and over, this place is not for you. This place and its inhabitants are out to hurt you. But I have to wonder, for a series that highlights inaccessibility and discrimination in such a hard light, why too is the game itself not as accessible as it could have been? This is Little Nightmares. Hello friends, and welcome back to my game accessibility series, where we review and test out accessibility features in new games and old favorites. This episode is going to be a bit different because, well, Little Nightmares doesn't have accessibility features to toggle. Granted, there are accessibility features interspersed in this game, so I want to give credit where credit is due, but we're going to have to talk about that later. Despite my criticism of this game, I love Little Nightmares. If you told me a couple years ago that I'd willingly play a horror puzzle platformer game and beat said horror puzzle platformer game and would want to play the subsequent games in this series and read up on all of the theories and lore in my spare time, I would have said, what? As I said in the beginning, the core theme of the franchise is about navigating inaccessible terrain with antagonistic authority figures whose sole aim is to use you for whatever purpose they choose. Sound familiar? Specifically those who navigate the world today with any disability. We see it in our architecture, in our infrastructure, and we hear it from authority figures who should represent all of their people. This place is not for you. Your comfort, your inclusion doesn't matter. You're not welcome. Little Nightmares is one of the most hauntingly beautiful and disgusting games that I have ever played. Developed by Artsy Studios and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment in 2017, it was ranked 28 in Eurogamer's top 50 games, 20 in Game Radar Plus's top 25, and 27 on Polygon's 50 best games of that year. Its reception was overall a positive one, though the criticisms include the game to be mechanically clumsy and some of the gaming fundamentals imbalanced, which is something I agree with due to personal gameplay experience. But most will say, myself included, this game stays with you, particularly in the dark when you are settling down to sleep. I'm highlighting Little Nightmares not to shame the franchise or Artsy Studios, but to talk about the unique challenge that comes with making puzzle platformers, and the horror game genre in general, accessible to a wider, more inclusive audience. The game's lack of customizable accessibility, which unfortunately continues in Little Nightmares 2, is an overarching issue that game devs have to finding this balance with keeping their game's ambiance and fundamental mechanics intact while still making it fun and challenging to those who want or need a different gameplay experience. Which means, yes friends, we're going to be talking about the controversial yellow paint debate in this episode, and dip our toes into aim assist for a future accessibility conversation. As always with this series, we're going to take a look at the different features introduced in the pilot episode with Coral Island and see what future games similar to Little Nightmares can utilize to make the horror puzzle platformer game genre more accessible. Save that 5 times fast, right? Let's get into it by talking about motor accessibility features. To Little Nightmares' credit, you can do controls reconfiguration for the mouse and keyboard, but the Switch doesn't have that. Hello, editor Artsy here. I just wanted to make a correction to my essay that both the Switch 1 and 2 have controls reconfiguration in their hardware, but it's not in the game, and that's what I'm focusing on, so just letting you know. But this game wasn't designed for the keyboard and mouse in mind. There is no adjustable sensitivity, and there is no visible user interface outside of the menu screen, which can be used to pause the game at any time that you need to take a breather. The user interface I can sort of understand because the whole of the game is interacting with the environment. There's no inventory, only tools to pick up along the way to either light your path or defend yourself. And then there are the dreaded heartbeat vibrations. If you play using a controller or a console, the controls begin to vibrate to the tempo of a heartbeat, getting progressively faster as danger gets progressively nearer. And to me, that feature is a cool addition for the thrills, but that should be optional. Toggleable. There should be a way to turn that off if it causes distress or even pain to a person's hands. Due to Little Nightmares' gameplay style, text-based directions fade into view when you come into contact with a new tool or when you need to throw a gnome at an unsuspecting door. But there's no speech, only visual and audio cues made by NPCs and interactables, and starting areas that act as the tutorial with progressively harder enemies and environmental puzzles. There are a plethora of save points that are a godsend if you die, which you will. A lot, so you don't have to start from the very beginning. This game, despite not having toggleable accessibility features, is rather forgiving in this case, expecting you to fail over and over until you get it just right. The replayability of this game is rather high for that reason, but the just right isn't so forgiving. When you're like me and tend to panic, or perhaps your controller is janky, or maybe you don't have the motor control that's needed to press the right button at the exact moment you need to make your escape, those many efforts become frustrating. To the point the game isn't scary anymore, it's obnoxious, unplayable. The amount of times I just fell over the edge escaping the twin chefs simply because I needed to get the timing absolutely perfect in order to not only escape their grasp, but to jump on the flipping meat hook and hold on. That particular part of the first game was so difficult for me that beating the lady, the final boss, felt almost too easy. It took me over 30 times, yes, 30 times, to get past that one scene in my first playthrough, but defeating the lady, just one time. But to be fair, I did watch a lot of streamers play that, and so I kind of knew how to beat the lady, but that's besides the point. Besides the point. This definitely showed how mechanically clumsy and unbalanced the first game was, and certainly impossible to play unless your reflexes and your controller were at functioning competency. A lot of gamer bros are probably going to say, wait, hold on. Get good, scrub. Thank you, bad actor Antonio, I appreciate it. And sure, through trial and error and challenges, we get a little better every time. Reflexes and response time are tried and true indications of athleticism in a lot of games, including puzzle platformers like Little Nightmares. Overcoming adversity and triumphing over what felt impossible is an elating feeling, but not everyone starts at level 0. And while I have a video planned for the nuance and concerns of accessibility in competitive gaming spaces, sometimes we do need assistance in order to simply play a game. It's equity versus equality. It's political. And Little Nightmares is political. It references the dehumanization of children, how easy it is to remove a marginalized group's autonomy based on an established power structure by literal physical size. It highlights environmental factors that are impossible to navigate without extra effort. The game is a glaring reflection of real everyday horror, so why were toggleable accessibility and game customization options left out? I'm not going to put words into the mouths of the game devs at Tarsier Studios because we don't know why accessibility wasn't included, and I'm not about to point fingers and shout "j'accuse ableism" without the resources to back it up. It's truly amazing how far accessibility in gaming has come since 2017. Not as much as there should be, but there's progress. And since then, organizations like Can I Play That and Game Accessibility Guidelines has been instrumental in the advocacy and consultation for accessibility in gaming. Many indies and large gaming companies have prioritized accessibility in some capacity. Games like Last of Us 2 celebrated as one of the most accessible games to date. Others, like Stardew Valley and Cult of the Lamb, adding more options over the years since the respective launches, and Coral Island, which had varied accessibility options even in its early access days. But here's the kicker. On the topic of Last of Us 2, which was released in 2020, has over 60 accessibility settings. The developers at Naughty Dog's goal from the very beginning was to have as many fans of the franchise be able to play. But their development budget for the game was a whopping $220 million, which Tarsier Studios did not have for Little Nightmares. Naughty Dog had nearly 1,000 employees. Tarsier Studios less than 100. Team and budget size besides, with game dev teams smaller than Tarsier Studios making their games accessible from the get-go with less resources and even less people, why wasn't Little Nightmares 2 improved with accessibility features after its predecessor's success? Again, I'm not here to shout j'accuse, but let's bring up a scary talking point that tends to fry the minds of those who struggle with critical thinking. Not you, obviously, and that's nuance. Not every game can be accessible the same way, and it's possible that puzzle platformer games may be more difficult to apply accessibility features with such finicky mechanics and the prioritization of environmental ambiance, especially regarding reflexive and time-crunchy mechanics. The most apparent argument is probably the most understandable one: lack of resources, including but not limited to budget, people, time, know-how. In my last accessibility video, I mentioned how we still don't have a standard policy for accessibility in the gaming world. Not every game dev company has the budget to produce a game with all the fixings, and not every game developer has the background knowledge to bring accessibility to their game design. Most large game developers have a rotating output of projects, unlike Concerned Ape, who has added update after update on Stardew Valley for nearly 10 years, because that game is his literal baby, and a resounding success. And indies usually have one shot to make their one game a success to the general gaming population. What can I say? Capitalism's a bitch. And then there's the gamer bro reason, aka the yellow paint debate, which I think is a larger factor than what game devs give it credit for. And that is, some accessibility features impact their game's ambiance and integrity by making the game itself easier to play with visual audio cues, very difficulty options, and aim assist, which is a huge controversy in competitive PvP spaces. They have an image in their mind's eye how this game is going to feel, how this game is going to play, and diehard fans too. And having to alter that to any capacity may feel sacrilegious. But what is the yellow paint debate, Artsy? Well, boil up some water in the kettle, friends, because I'm about to serve you some tea and resurging game drama. Yay. The yellow paint debate, or the yellow ladder controversy, is the viral debate revolving the use of brightly colored paints to visually cue interactable objects like ladders in video games. It's been around since the 2010s, but it grew in notoriety in October of 2023 when someone posted a screenshot of a ladder painted yellow in the 2023 remake of Resident Evil 4, and then again resurfaced in February 2024 with another post sharing ledges marked with yellow paint in the remake of Final Fantasy VII. Gamers and even some game devs came out of the woodwork calling it a virus with the spread of clearly identifiable interactables in game environments. Some called the use of the yellow paint technique as too handholdy and immersion breaking, and the retort was that it was necessary to minimize frustration and an easy-to-apply accessibility feature that was simply part of the game. I take issue with the term too handholdy because game devs will be the first to tell you, y'all were dumb. I rewatched my gameplay for both Little Nightmares 1 and 2 for this video, and the amount of hints that I just tra-la-la'd past were embarrassing. Even in 2017, Little Nightmares had this issue. There are so many things to interact with, some of which just exist to enhance the immersion, and some being crucial to solving puzzles. The amount of times I tried to reach something only for it to be a shoe instead of a plot point was too many to count. So yeah, I want to know what I can use when I see it, or at least have the option after sitting with a puzzle for 30 minutes. How would I know to break a back mirror when most of the game plays as a linear platformer? Which rotten wood plank is actually breakable, or do you climb it, or is it just there? Which toppled filing cabinet has a flipping gnome inside? Tarsier Studios did an incredible job with storytelling without a narrator by simply using the environment. If you pay attention and take your time, you'll see the subtle hints of what to do and where to go. And if you're stumped, you can go back to the start of that chapter or the most recent checkpoint to see what you missed. However, game devs will be the first to tell you we're not as smart as we think we are. We need more hints than we think we do, and some need more support than others. There are games who do this more artistically than others. Gloomy Eyes, a horror puzzle platformer game, which was released in September 2025, and I highly recommend if Little Nightmares is a little bit too intense for you. They did an amazing job using literally yellow paint to mark interactables and pathing. It matched the dark Tim Burton aesthetics that brought a bit of whimsy to this dystopian zombie apocalypse. Whenever you entered an area, the interactable items began to subtly glow, indicating their locations but not what they were used for. Gloomy Eyes was still a challenge despite seeing where I'd ultimately end up or use, because all the yellow paint did was show the way. It was my job to figure out what to do next, and without the yellow paint or the glowing mechanic, Gloomy Eyes would have likely been unplayable for a lot of people. But regardless, no matter how out of place yellow paint or whatever they use to mark as hints or interactables feel to you, visual distinctions are crucial to people with low vision and color blindness. So gamer bros, yeah, high contrast options are necessary. Maybe not for you, but certainly to a lot of other people who want to play and love the same games that you do as well. This is especially crucial in horror games where light theory is a major component of the gameplay experience. To say that Little Nightmares is dark, I mean it literally. And sure, there is a brightness slider that helps match your screen to balance the lighting, which is probably an accessibility feature now that I think about it, but that can only do so much for someone who really needs visual cues and support to play a game. I'm specifically talking about seeing outlines of items and enemies in low light settings. This is where the remake of Silent Hill 2 did a phenomenal job. For those who don't know about the Silent Hill franchise, it's a series of survival horror games created by Keiichiro Toyama, set in the fictional town of Silent Hill. The fog is a consistent theme throughout the franchise. Not only was it an immersion tool where feelings of uncertainty, isolation, and being watched added to the thrill, it was originally a design choice to make sure the game could run properly due to the limited computing power of that era of consoles. The limited field of view limits your vision, but heightens the senses knowing that you're not alone in the town. The remake of Silent Hill 2 is a goldmine for accessibility. A friend of mine who owns the game was kind enough to show the accessibility screen and toggled most of them so we could see what it looked like to play with them on. Since I've already had experience with the color blindness and dyslexia options with Coral Island, we instead focused on adding color to Silent Hill's inhabitants based on who we were playing as, James, friendlies, in this case Maria, and the not-so-friendlies, the lying figures. We also wanted to highlight interactables, increase the icon size for which button to press when performing an action, and a bunch of other things. The result was actually pretty fascinating. During this playthrough, I was on a group call with said friend, her girlfriend, and my husband. And interestingly, her girlfriend noted that the visual accessibility options did make the game less scary for her, which we all agreed with. It's kind of hard to think of these body horror monstrosities the same way when you see them in a bright, out-of-place color, something I'm sure some people have capital O opinions for. However, I don't think it's a detriment to the game. Not only is it a great aid for visual impairments, but great for people who want to dip their toes into horror by removing a bit of the immersion, just to appreciate the genre at their own pace. Despite my enjoyment of the series, I'm not a horror connoisseur, I don't think. I respect horror, and I definitely have pursued the horror genre in games and comics for the technical appreciation of them, but I'm not someone who actively reads horror novels or watches horror films or shows as a wind-down activity. I still have the bathroom scene in What Lies Beneath forever imprinted in my brain from a 5th grade sleepover, okay? Like, I watch movie trailers and I read their synopsis and plots on the Wikipedia pages, but I don't watch them for enjoyment. When I say horror sticks with me, it really sticks with me, and so similar to watching other streamers play horror games, adding color swatches like these to characters, especially monsters, allows for me to be one step removed from being too scared to play or watch. Gamer bros may call this too handholdy, and my response to that is, so what? Games like Little Nightmares, where darkness plays a key role in storytelling, would absolutely benefit from this sort of visual aid, not only for those who are vision impaired or who want to have extra support with being reminded which buttons to press or which shoe is actually a plot point. It allows for people new to the horror genre to ease their way into the immersion, same for those new to puzzle platformer games. We hold up graphics on this pedestal of being the most important thing to game design, but without a compelling story and functioning mechanics, good graphics don't make a good game. Going back to the Silent Hill series, diehard fans remember what it used to look like compared to the remake, and respectfully, it was of its time. So to say that these accessibility options ruin the immersion possibly means that you don't have faith in the story. All the games, the comics, and the podcast in the Little Nightmares franchise prove time and again that this is a compelling world. I highly doubt the environment or the game's plots would be impacted with visual aids, because the story carries from beginning to end. We are on the edge of our seat from the time we arrive in the nowhere to the end, which varies in catharsis, terror, or betrayal. For the final stretch of this video essay, I want to go back and talk about something I said with the yellow paint debate, in that some accessibility features impact a game's ambiance and integrity by making the game itself easier to play with visual audio cues, varied difficulty options, and aim assist. This is absolutely true, technically. No, I mean technically, like in the game's code. If you've ever added mods to a game, Stardew Valley and BG3 peeps, I see you, you know that adding code to an already established game is a finicky process. Every time Concerned Ape updates his game, either with minor bug fixes or major additions like the Night Market or Ginger Island, that additional code needs to be updated to work with what's now different in the game. Some modding is as simple as a sprite replacement, which doesn't really impact the code itself unless it's an option to manually toggle, but accessibility options such as varied skill levels alters much more than that. It impacts, for the lack of a better word, ease of completing a task or defeating a boss. I'm dipping my toes into game development, so my understanding of this is still very surface level, but I can tell you from the knowledge I do have, coding is much more delicate than a souffle made with nitroglycerin. A literal semicolon, or lack thereof, can literally break your game. I should know. I have done it many times. Coding is a series of declarations that determines what is true, not true, and false. Not true and false are two completely different things, by the way. Ask me how I know. Say for a normal level difficulty, a boss will have a certain amount of hit points and damage dealt per hit. Your hit points will likely be constant regardless of the difficulty level, but how much damage you deal per hit will change depending on which difficulty level you're playing on. This is much easier to do when it's just direct damage dealt or received. That's basic math. But now let's consider the bosses in the first Little Nightmares. In Little Nightmares, 6 goes up against Roger the Janitor, the twins, the guests, and the lady. Aside from the lady and the janitor, none of the bosses are actually beatable until the end. Sure, you dismember Roger and, well, you know, eat the lady, but the whole point of the game is to avoid getting caught. You don't fight the baddies unless it's absolutely necessary. Your main objective is to outrun the threats. You don't have hit points either. If you get caught or, fall into some random chasm for the 100th time, the game fades to black and spawns you at the nearest save point. Now, if Little Nightmares had varied difficulty levels for the bosses, the easiest fights to modify would likely be the janitor and the lady's final scenes. Maybe instead of having to pull both of the hinges to decapitate Roger's arms, it takes 1 pull. Maybe instead of having to face the lady 6 times with the mirror, it takes 3. But this is where modifying the game to multiple difficulty levels get dicey, because those are the only 2 instances where you're directly battling a boss in this game that requires a repeated action. Each boss has a unique mechanic and weakness. One is blind but has excellent hearing and reach, 2 work together and can easily catch you if you don't find a place to hide but are kinda dumb, and there's a group with fast reflexes but limited reach and attention span and are mostly sedentary until they transform into a Spirited Away chase scene reenactment. And then the final head honcho uses shadow, speed, and light to confuse and terrify until you reflect it into her face with an interactable item. You can't fight the twins the same way that you fight the janitor. You can't fight the guests the same way that you fight the lady. Each enemy has a specific and fine-tuned mechanic that you as 6 have to adapt and work around. So I can only imagine how hard it would be to vary the responses, their specific difficulty levels, their weaknesses, even the various environments in the maw to make it easier to navigate. The point being, would this level of modification be literally game-breaking? Would it be as simple as making the responses slower? Maybe the janitor drops you once or twice or flat out misses. Maybe you hold onto the mirror instead of scrambling to pick it up to give you an advantage. Maybe, with the exception of the lady, it takes a lot for the other bosses to even see you, and the entire game is just appreciating the puzzle platformer aspect of the maw. Maybe the respawn is where you were caught, inching you ever so closer to the end. As simple as that sounds, that significantly alters the game's code, and to be honest, I don't think that's what makes Little Nightmares inaccessible. Going back to my aim assist and varying difficulty points, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out varying difficulty levels of the game's environment. We usually think of aim assist with single-player shooters or PvP games like Overwatch and Fortnite. I've had experience with aim assist in previous games like the Mass Effect series, but being new to puzzle platformers, my only relevant experience with this mechanic was with Valley Peaks last year. Valley Peaks is as far removed from horror as cute rock climbing frogs can be, and though its first-person perspective was hard on my gentle stomach, I was amazed by the aim assist that made the rock climbing puzzles easier. Aim assist in puzzle platformers act differently than that of a shooter, in that you as the character have a broader and more lenient reach for specific surfaces or objects. Aside from targeted assistance, it prioritizes a player's intent, provides environmental highlights where the player locks on the object or surface, and mostly provides space for the player to focus on the puzzle logic over the precise movements or targeting. In Little Nightmares, if you press the ZR button on the Switch, 6 will grab an interactable item and interact with it according to its specific function. This same function will either grab a shoe or hold onto a swaying rope. Same button, different mechanics. In my attempt at looking at the maw's environment, I can only imagine how hard it would be to create an aim assist function in a world where most of the environment is interactable. If there was aim assist for specific surfaces and objects, would there be a tendency for telepathy where key puzzle items just manifest in 6's hand because the player looked in a certain direction? I don't know the answer to this because, again, I'm new to game development and puzzle platformers aren't my specific niche. But I do know that aim assist to some capacity would be helpful to games like Little Nightmares. I personally know a few people who couldn't progress the game because of precise movement and targeting issues, and they shelved the game, which sucks because it's such a great franchise. A lot of accessibility advocates will tell you that accessibility does not equate difficulty. Sure, most games benefit from having story or peaceful mode to an extreme mode of playing, but accessibility means just that, to be accessible. Would people like story mode options in horror games? Probably, yeah, but that has nothing to do with being disabled. Many beloved games like the Mass Effect series or Baldur's Gate 3 have them, especially when the story is so rich and fulfilling that maybe you're a lover and not a fighter. I don't kink shame, but the crucial part of accessibility is being able to alter the gameplay experience so that someone can just play the game. Little Nightmares can still be a challenge, the bosses can still get you, you can still lose and have a good time playing. Regardless of how able you are, I'd argue almost everyone enjoys a good challenge and pushing themselves to be better. So what's next for the series? At the time of this recording, there hasn't been any mention as to what accessibility features, if any, will be available in the upcoming game in the series Little Nightmares 3. Tarsier Studios no longer works on nor owns the franchise, so the development of the game went to Supermassive Games. When you watch the trailer, you can tell it's a different developer. The cinematic quality feels more like an interactive narrative than a puzzle platformer. Basically, it feels like Until Dawn, but with Little Nightmare assets, if that makes any sense. And that's not a problem for me. I'm actually quite excited for the ability to play with another person or see how the AI compares to the one in Little Nightmares 2. Maybe a new developer brings new considerations that Tarsier Studios didn't have technically or financially for the series. Unfortunately, neither Supermassive Games nor Bandai Namco Entertainment responded to my inquiries about accessibility in Little Nightmares 3, so we'll all just get to experience it together at launch. But with multiplayer added to the mix in the delicate art of coding, I'm curious how accessibility would be impacted by another person playing the same game. With modding games like Stardew Valley or RimWorld in multiplayer, each person has to have the same mods toggled. In RimWorld's case, it has to be in the same exact order. But with accessibility features, would that also be an issue? I know that you can have varied audio preferences and it not impact a multiplayer game, but if Little Nightmares 3 has toggleable accessibility options at all, would both players have to have the same preferences for difficulty levels? How would pausing the game work when one player needs a breather? Would the game pause for both? Again, we don't know Supermassive Games' plans for the game. However, the developers do have an extensive background in accessibility. Until Dawn's accessibility features, a game published in 2015 by the way, include, but are not limited to, having a screen reader feature, subtitles with varying font sizes and font types for dyslexia, aim assist, persistent center dot for motion sickness prevention, thank you, alterations to the QTE or QuickTime event which allows for varied difficulty levels and preferences for how it is seen on the screen, various audio and video changes based on individual preferences, and control reconfiguration. So yeah, if Little Nightmares 3 doesn't have toggleable accessibility features, I personally think that was a choice made by the developers to refrain from putting them in. But to be fair, Until Dawn is an interactive drama horror game, not a puzzle platformer. Both are within the horror genre, so is it that puzzle platformers are held to code accessibility for? Or is there a completely different reason why certain types of games are more accessible than others? If you are a game dev and know this answer, please let me know in the comments because I find it really fascinating. As I work on my game prototypes, my hope is to prioritize accessibility from the get-go. I want to make my game as accessible as possible so that even more people can play with as many specific preferences as possible available to them. Not every game dev company has those resources, and it's important to remember that in a capitalist society, which we live in today, until we make this a big deal every time and boycott loudly with our wallets every time, game devs will prioritize what makes them the most money at launch, which in this economy, I don't blame indies, but I 100% hold the companies with CEOs making 9-figure salaries to this standard, and I will call it like I see it. J'accuse. That is it for my video essay on Little Nightmares, friends. If you've made it this far, please comment down below what accessibility feature a game must have so you can play it, and what are your thoughts on the upcoming game in the Little Nightmares series, and how do you feel about the yellow paint in games? As always, I'm going to leave you with a sentiment that I leave on every live stream and video, that I hope you're being kind to yourself and being kind to others and making art and playing games and encouraging others to do the same. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!